Agus tá fáilte roimh seach a cháirte go dtí Q&A bio bite-sized na níosa. So you're very welcome in, friends, to this month's live Q&A session for Bitesize Irish. My name is Ben, and with me tonight is Bitesize's learning content developer, Niall. So how fáilte roimh the Niall?
Am I good? You've got dinner? How are you?
And yes, anocht be mi de diru na haraha thusig. Tonight we are focusing on the initial mutations in Irish, which sounds a little bit scary. Neil's not going to turn into a werewolf or something there. But
grammar is scary enough without that.
It is scary enough without werewolves. So we welcome your questions, and before we get started, if you're watching this after it's been recorded, after the live session is over, you're welcome to submit your questions in the comments below, and we'll keep an eye on that and do our best to help you. And if you're watching live at the moment, of course, you can just type your comments or questions into the chat bar there on YouTube, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. But first of all, Niall, what's the crack with initial mutations? What are they?
Initial mutations, I suppose it's one of the big differences between Irish and most other languages. I think they have them in other Celtic languages too, to some extent. But initial means the first letter of a word, and mutation is a change. So the first letter of a word can change in Irish, and in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Okay, so presumably this can take different forms.
Yeah, so there are two very famous kinds of initial mutation and a couple of other little variations too. So we have séimhiú and uru. So we'll be talking about both tonight.
Okay, very good. So before we get on to any questions, maybe we'll just have an overview of what it is we're talking about for those who aren't familiar with it. So the first one that you've mentioned is séimhiú. So in English, that's lenition or aspiration. But what does that mean, and when does it occur?
Séimhiú means softening. It comes from, we have an adjective shave that means soft and gentle. And it's when a consonant gets kind of softer. But practically, what we see is the letter H. We add a letter H to another consonant. In fact, the MH in the word séimhiú is an example. It's not, we don't say séimhiú. MH is taken together as one unit. It's an M séimhiú, and the M has been softened, so we're saying séimhiú. And although it's strange at first, that MH in this word sounds like the letter V.
Very good. So you say it's applied to consonants. So
yeah.
Is it applied to all consonants?
Not all consonants. The trick we learned at school in Tyrone was the letters we don't séimhiú are vowels, naturally, HLNR, SC, SM, SP, ST. So HLNR. We're not going to have double H. Even Irish isn't crazy enough. Double H, folks. LH, NH, RH, no, it doesn't exist. And we can séimhiú these letters on the screen that we can see. So we will see BH, CH, DH, FH. And you've probably all seen some examples of that already in names, for example, or other words in Irish that you know.
Okay, so you have a choice there. You can learn the ones that it's not applied to, or you can learn the ones that it is applied to. Seems to me the ones that it is applied to is a little bit shorter. And we may be able to make this one rhyme. I think it's BCD, FG, MP, ST. It kind of rhymes, but it's not regular.
Maybe we've got triplets, BCD, FG, MP, ST. Maybe.
Okay. And yes, and What about this? Okay, so it's happening with let's just say here, it's going to happen with these when they occur at the beginning of a word, but can it occur if they're occurring in combination with other consonants at the beginning of a word? So if we have, say, SC, like for
yes, sorry. With the letter S, it's a bit tricky. If we have CL, for example, or FR, we can just do it. We can just put our H in as normal. So you might have CHL, FHR, no problem. With the letter S, it's a bit tricky. So again, in the little rhyme that I learned at school, part of that was HLNR, SC, SM, SP, ST.
Okay.
We can't put the H between S and C. So the word shkian, marhampa, shkian is a knife, SCIAN. You'll never have H between the S and C. But there are other words that start with S, and even words which have a consonant, marhampa, sron, nose, SR, ofada N. And we can, it sounds weird for English ears, SH, arfada ON, hron, my nose.
Okay, so not many men wear séimhiú, but if a man were to put on his séimhiú, it would be a séimhiú.
A séimhiú, yeah.
Okay, so here's one here's one I prepared earlier. So here we have CMPT. So these are the ones with the S.
Yeah, so that's ST, SM, SP, ST will not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is talking about when séimhiú happens, but I suppose what's as important is why séimhiú happens, or what are the instances in which it happens. So tell us about that.
Well, I suppose it does come up in the middle of words or at the end of the words, and that's just part of the spelling. It just exists there. Again, first example we had was séimhiú itself, MH. So that's just part of the spelling. That's never going to change. The big problem is when we have these changes, initial mutation. So sometimes the first letter will change. So maybe a H will be inserted after that S. So the reasons that happen, there's a number of reasons. One is my, your, his. So possessive adjectives, my, your, and his, but not her and not the plural ones. So cupan, ta cupan agaman seo, the cupan te live. I have a cup of mitti. So mo cupan, my cup, do cupan, your cup, a cupan, his cup. Her cup, a cupan. Séimhiú, no H in there.
This is it, and now this is an interesting one because I find that people who are starting to get their head around this, lady learners, let's say, sometimes think that when they are saying muchapon, that they must say mukupon because they are female. But it only occurs when you're referring to another person who is female, not when you are female and referring to yourself. So
yeah, gender in Irish, it's not always talking about the person, the gender of the person, it's talking about just the noun, the word itself. So, yeah, it's an important distinction.
Indeed. Okay, so talking about nouns, it's going to occur on masculine nouns after the article, as well as another instance.
Séimhiú?
Right.
Yeah, well, on masculine nouns in one particular case, in the genitive case. So a normal masculine noun, for example, the man, an far, there's no
Indeed.
shame.
Indeed.
But if you say the man's hat, hata an year, there's an FH in there. So the genitive is always a bit of a tricky topic. It's more of an intermediate level topic. But masculine nouns in the genitive case. But in the nominative case, which is the most, I suppose, the normal case, the basic form we find in the dictionary, in that case, it's feminine nouns after the article. So, as I said before, the man, an far. Best example for a feminine noun, an van, the woman. So Ban, we all know, means woman, but the woman, and van. And that's the nominative case.
Lovely stuff. So we just had one comment came in there as we were going along introducing this concept. James Hoey is asking if we can repeat the consonants on which séimhiú does not occur. So I don't have a graphic for that. I only have a graphic for the ones that do.
Yeah, so that's H, L, N, R, then SC, SM, SP, ST. Okay, so the other consonants like B, C, D, they can take séimhiú, and other words that start with S, like S vowel or SR, SN, they're okay. So HLNR, SE, SM, SP, ST. That's
lovely stuff. Yes. Okay, so we have male nouns after the article. What other instances we have of séimhiú? We have prepositions. Can throw up séimhiú.
Yeah, after certain prepositions. Again, that's not a very simple answer, really. You have to get used to it over time. So it's not every preposition. But de, do, fui. After the word sa in most dialects, we use séimhiú, so sawalya, chashk, the examples we have here, fui word, and so on. But other prepositions will have different rules. So just keep an eye out for that. And, you know, don't worry if you get it wrong one time, because everybody gets it wrong a lot more than once. There are rules there. It's not random.
But nobody dies, which is, it's always important to remember.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody dies. So perhaps we'll move on to other forms of initial mutation. There are other instances where the séimhiú occurs, like after certain numbers, after prefixes. But, you know, we're not going to regurgitate the whole grammar book.
And I always think that the number one thing with séimhiú and with uru coming up, the number one step is to work out how it works, how you can spell that, like where to put the H, and how that sounds, of course. And then the question of the situations when we use it, there are a lot. So that's, you know, that's the second step. That's the rest of your life. So we're all still improving on that one, to be honest.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned uru there.
Yeah.
What is an uru? How about that first, rather than when we need to use one?
Yeah, uru means eclipse. Often in grammar, it's called eclipsis in English. So uru nagrania is a solar eclipse. And it's a great way to think of it. With uru, we add an extra letter to the front of the word. And this new letter kind of comes across and blocks the original first letter. So we don't hear that at all. And there's a couple of examples on the screen. Ocht bin, ar garja, imleana, inaliv. You can see the BP, the GC, the MB, the NG. The original letter there, the original first letter, the P, C, B, the G, capital G for Goliv. We don't hear that at all. Sometimes people want to still keep that in, but no, it's completely eclipsed. So it's a great description, I think, for that mutation. We keep the spelling in, but we don't hear that letter P, C, and so on.
Yeah, perhaps it's where I'm from, but for me on the G, I think there's still a hint of it. Ingailev. Ingailev.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Okay, so so these are the ones here. These are the consonants that are taking the uru.
Yeah, again, this is a rhyme I learned at school, and I remember one day back in the 90s, our teacher came in and he didn't even say hello. He just said this rhyme. He said, MBP, NDT, NGC, BHF, N-vowels was the way he said it. And he just repeated that many, many times until we were all repeating with him, and we had no idea what he was talking about. But I often think it's the last thing that that'll be running through my head.
Yeah.
I'm in a home center, lying in the hospital. MBP, NDT, NGC, BHF, N-vowels. So
it's a clever one because, yeah, what's happening here, what's going on here, this is not a list of the consonants that take Uru. This is a formula.
So, yeah, if we just look at the first three of them, M before B. So if we have a word that begins with a B, for example, blian, year, then when we say this year, it's imliana, and M is before B. So M eclipses B. But then if we have a word with P, B will eclipse P. And the letter M itself, nothing eclipses M. So there's nothing before that. So we don't have to worry. And P doesn't eclipse N. That's a different, it's a different line of this rhyme. N eclipses D, D eclipses T, N eclipses G, G eclipses C. BH is effectively one letter because, like we had before, that's usually a V or sometimes a W, V or W sound. So that goes before F. And usually N hyphen before a vowel, but sometimes we don't bother with that one. There's rules about that, but not always see that example, I think. Okay.
And of course, then there are the ones which just can't take Uru or don't take Uru, which we couldn't conceive of taking Uru.
Yeah. Also, N, I think, is not mentioned there.
Of course. Yeah. Very good. So would you like to give us, maybe an indication of when you might use an Uru?
I think the first example of this one is after the preposition I, meaning in. It's the only preposition, I think, which takes Uru. Most of them take séimhiú or nothing at all. But if you want to say in Dublin, which is where I am right now, Dublin is Baile Hatlia. So M before B, Imaile Hatlia. Imaile Hatlia. So again, we don't hear that B at all. It's just the M. So when we talk about in, I, then we need Uru. So that's one situation. Another one is after certain numbers again. Generally speaking, from numbers 1 to 6, we use séimhiú. Numbers 7 to 10, we use Uru. But the numbers are a whole topic unto themselves, really, because we have number systems. When we use the genitive plural, after the article, there will be Uru. A good example of that is the county Donegal, which is Dunnanal in Irish. Dunnanal. It's the fort of the foreigners. The word for foreigner is gal, or one of the old words, gal. So Dunnanal. There's N before that capital G. So it's eclipsing it. That's a genitive plural, fort of the foreigners. And that's a great example, I think, because if you say in Donegal, you say in Nunnanal. You've got Uru and Uru again. And we don't have any of the very distinctive D or G that we know from the English version of the name. It's in Nunnanal. But I think, would you say, Ben, when we hear things like that in Nunnanal, we're imagining, we can feel that there is a submerged kind of D or G under that. We kind of backwards engineer. Or if you hear Big Gabra, you're imagining that, there's a C there, rather than it's just a G.
Absolutely.
So when you get used to it, it becomes quite natural, I think. So it's definitely strange at first. I remember that feeling.
Very good. So that's Uru. We've had séimhiú. We've had Uru. Any other initial mutations spring to mind?
There's a couple of other little things that happen. They're not such big topics, but we will see them from time to time. Sometimes the letter T pops up, and I've heard people call it Uru because it kind of works like an Uru, but it's not part of that group. It's not the same thing exactly. T-prothesis is a very technical term for it, adding a T. Sometimes we add a T to a vowel, and that is usually before a masculine noun in the nominative case. So the word for president, this is my go-to example for this one. The word for president is uachtaran. So if we say the president, it's an tuachtaran with a T at the beginning. But we also sometimes add T to S, which might sound very strange. And again, that happens in situations where you might expect séimhiú, and that's how it was described to me at school, that TS is a kind of a strange séimhiú because the letter S does funny things. We've already kind of talked about that today. So I remember the family name Fox. We would pronounce it as Makachunny. You might say Makachunik down in Kerry, yeah, the harder G at the end. But instead of Shunnach, which means fox, it's in the genitive. So we've got TS, Makachunny or Makachunig. So that's the T. Before vowels and before S sometimes. And h-prothesis, that's adding H before a vowel. That happens after some prepositions like le, le. So if we have a friend called Una, and we are with Una, we would say tame or tamwich le huna.
You might be with le huna ilohar nahura as well.
Ilohar nahura. Yeah. So in that case, that H, ilohar nahura, that is a feminine noun in the genitive singular. You know, a lot of details here, folks. But also a plural noun that starts with a vowel in the nominative. So ula is apples. So nahula, the apples.
So all of this, you know, I tend to deal with these things on a case-by-case basis. This is a bit bamboozling if you're trying to take it all in this sort of format. But essentially, the best way to learn these things is through exposure, through listening, through reading, and if you get the opportunity, through speech. Because without thinking about it, you should get to a stage through exposure where if these things do not occur, it sounds wrong, essentially, to you. It doesn't sound right. So this is not something that ideally you want to be computing as you are speaking. Once you practice and once you expose yourself on a regular basis and frequently to Irish or any language, if you're trying to learn grammar, you should get to a stage where it doesn't sound right if certain things aren't happening or occurring.
And we're after talking about a lot of rules there, folks.
Yeah.
If this is your first time for all of this, it's so much. You know, we would never expect you to just automatically get it right just after that. But if, for example, if you study one of these rules today, if it's like that, maybe the personal, the possessive adjectives, my, your, his, her, those kind of ones, then what you could do if you know, that's one discrete topic. It's not too big. But then for the next week or 2 weeks or whatever, you can just be on the lookout for examples of that. You know, if you're interacting with Irish language media online or even talking with people, look out for examples of that. And then it'll feel a lot more natural. And of course, when you do it, when you practice, when you use it, it becomes second nature, like Ben just said. And when you're learning, you have to think about it. But when you have learned it, you don't need to think about it. It just feels natural, like the way we all speak. We all know a lot of English grammar rules without realizing we do, or other languages possibly.
Indeed. So do you think it's useful to approach learning in the early stages in that way, where you say, I'm not going to worry about understanding why everything I encounter happens. Just right now, I'm going to focus on this. And if I see a noun with séimhiú after a pronoun, for instance, personal pronoun, I'm going to just consider why that's happening. And then...
Yeah, we can't do everything at once. And sometimes that can be very daunting or, you know, stress-inducing to try and have to understand every detail of everything. So it's worth taking it piece by piece, bite size, you might say, and you know, spending as much time practicing and especially at the early stages, listening and reading and seeing good examples of correct Irish. That really gets you accustomed to it. And but I think it's good to have a bit of conscious study of why these things happen alongside that. But you know, no one expects you to do it all inside 2 weeks. You know, that's just impossible. But there are rules. We can put it together.
Absolutely. So thanks for that overview of initial mutations. We have a few questions come in, so we'll have a look. This one here is quite specific. It relates to dialects. So Samuel says, I'll just throw it up there. I was hoping you could help to explain some of the key word mutations that occur only in Gaeilge Connacht when compared to Munster and Ulster dialects. This is quite specific.
Yeah, well, as if we needed this topic to get more tricky. Of course, there are slight differences between the dialects, the 3 dialects of Irish, and we've differences in pronunciation and vocab, and a couple of differences in grammar too, which is where this comes in. We do have a course in Bitesize which deals with the major features of dialects, so definitely have a look at that if you're interested. Off the top of my head, I can think of a couple of things in Gaeilge Connacht, which would be my grandparents' dialect, but I'm from Ulster myself. But the word sa we mentioned earlier, usually sa takes séimhiú, so I would say sawalya in the town or maybe at home. But I think in Gaeilge Connacht they use uru there, so they say samale with MB. That's one example. And I think they often use T before S in places that other people may not as well, in the dative, for example.
Okay. There we are.
Yeah.
So dá sé samale, let's say. And there you go. After den or done, the letter T comes before S. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think we do that one Ulster too, actually, the done and then. Yeah.
Alias, let me see now. Here's one for you. Let's just come in the chat on YouTube. Keep the questions coming in, folks. So, Cumra the Maggie, she says, we do this one as Gaeilge first. And going to Uru Ukal Iasachte, like American place names, for example, Imrukun in California. So, do you put Uru on foreign place names? Is the example that she's given here, but on foreign words, let's say.
Yeah, Kesht Eintach, Maggie, great question. The answer is yes and no. The official rule on Caijan Ifigul, the official standard of Irish, is to not do that, to not change a word that's not an Irish language word. Okay, so we wouldn't say Imricklin, we'd say in Brooklyn, in California. And that's the official rule. However, the official standard is not something we have to worry too much about if we're just chatting. It's something that's important for legal documents and so on. It's very, very formal. So in practice, I think a lot of people naturally would just do that, quite possibly, Imricklin, in California. So it's not a big... What would you think about that, Ben?
Well, I think it's a funny one because we do have Irish versions of many of the major world capitals, the ones that Irish people have emigrated to, or ones that are very important. So we have Paris, we have München, we have
Berlin.
We have Berlin, for instance. So some of them are very similar to the English. But for instance, you can say Imerlin because it's the Irish version. You can say Boris, but you can't say, if it were something more obscure, like, I don't know, what's the capital of Qatar? Qatar? Well, you can't put an Uru on that anyway. You can't put an Uru on a Q. It's a bad example.
I think, I've heard a lot about Doha during the World Cup. So, yeah.
So in Doha.
In Noha.
Yeah.
That would be very confusing because we wouldn't recognize it.
I find it a bit of a strange one because, to my mind, in is not really an Irish word for in.
Yeah.
We have it in onad there.
Before a vowel, we say in, don't we? But before Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, in California. It's a little odd. I lived in London for years, and we used to improvise Irish versions of place names. So Camden, for example, we used to spell Camden in Irish, Cermdin. That was our spelling. I don't know if it's in any book anywhere. And we would always say Igamden. Just felt natural. It wasn't uncomfortable. It just felt natural. So like in Canada, for example, in Canada. So officially, Maggie, no, we don't. But in practice, when speaking, you'll hear it, I think, especially with native speakers from Gaeltacht. Yeah.
It is a funny one, and here's another. She says, learners in my community in Nuaurach like to practice that in Cora, even saying Igueens. So
Igueens. Even I love it.
So there you go. Annie asks,
you should do a translation of the place names in New York. We were working on a map of the London Tube and translating all the places. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Lovely. So here's a question from Shorsha, which is quite an interesting one. This relates to cane. So Shorsha says, why do some words take séimhiú after the word cane and others do not? We have cane fá, cane cinál with no séimhiú, but then we have cane chi and cane chúis with séimhiú.
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. It might not be immediately clear, but the word cane has the article an inside it. So once you understand that, the question is easy because, like we said about anfar, anvan, after the article, a masculine noun in nominative has no séimhiú, and a feminine noun has séimhiú. So that's the reason. So when we say cén fa, the word fa is a masculine noun, and cén chúis, chúis is a feminine noun. So although it's not immediately clear, the article an is inside cane.
So cane means what the, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is the noun is going to behave exactly as it would if it were preceded by un. Yeah, okay.
In the nominative case.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so cane is not a preposition in that case. But we do have a question from Mike about prepositions. There's a learning question about approaches to learning. So Mike says, how does one really go about learning Irish prepositions coming from English?
Céim ar chéim, Mike, step by step. It can be done, of course. They're just different to English. So it's we wouldn't do it in an hour-long class session. And it's the same if people have experience with other languages too. The prepositions aren't exactly the same. So we usually, for example, say talk to. In Ireland and Britain, we say talk to. Maybe in North America, you might say talk with a little bit more. But definitely in a lot of European languages, they use the preposition with in that case. I think in French, parler avec and so on. And in Irish, laurla. So prepositions are just different between languages. Rather than learning, one preposition and all the uses, we usually learn it from the other side. What preposition each noun or verb needs, from that side. So if you're talking about being interested in something, the key word there is sim, which means interest. Tasim agam sahiol. I'm interested in music. So from that, we learn that we need to use in to talk about interest. So the word is very important for sim. And so on. So, but it's just piece by piece. Yeah, I don't know would you have anything to add to that, Ben?
No, I mean,
not
just
overnight.
Bit by bit. I'm learning them in Portuguese at the moment, and I think something that can help is graphics. If you just have some sort of little way of drawing something and how it relates to an object, if you're using them for, you know, ones that relate to orientation or time or whatever, a little, you know, something on top of a circle on top of a square, a circle inside a square, you know, these little just little lairody, little kind of sketches can help you to visualize the thing with, again, repetition.
And the other thing is that words don't exist on their own in a vacuum. You know, it isn't much use for me to learn the word sim and write down in my notes sim, it means interest. We need example sentences, and the example sentences will show us how it works. I mean, our wonderful online dictionaries have lots and lots of example sentences that show you how these things work. You know, just to highlight one nightmare of a word, Mike, the word for in English, F-O-R, is used for countless million functions, and it's impossible to just say what does for mean, because it really, really depends. And
it's hard to explain without using
how long have you been here for is totally different to I made a cake for you, you know. So we don't work from the word for, but from the other points of the language, maybe the verb or the noun and so on, or the adjective.
Absolutely. You cannot explain the word for without using the word for. That's the way I look at it. There's an interesting question here from Nancy, and this is really getting down to the fundamentals of things. Nancy says, is there an explicit instruction in, well, this relates to Bitesize and the learning content that you develop, and the learning materials and lessons that you develop. Is there an explicit instruction in the Bitesize program on word order? She says that she has difficulty in this area, trying to make sense of who did what in longer sentences.
I think it's a very good pointer from Nancy, actually. I feel that this is included, but I think we could also possibly add something new in to help beginners. I think, you know, it's a good area we could add something in. But basically, Irish is a VSO language, verb, subject, object. So we start with the verb. Very few languages in the world do that. Celtic languages are the main group that do that. But of course, in English, it's subject, verb, object. I play football, something like that. But in Irish, the verb is the first word, imriam pel. So sometimes it can be a bit confusing, I think, because you might end up with a couple of adjectives sitting next to each other in a way you don't in English, and it can be hard to work out where they belong, if you like. So yeah, it's definitely a bit different, and also because we have all these prepositional phrases. English uses a lot of verbs, I find. You know, I like it, I have it, and for those expressions in Irish, yeah, okay, we use a verb, but we just use is and ta as a verb. And the really interesting distinctive part lies when how we use prepositions. So that just means we have these different structures, like ta cupan te agam. There is a cup of tea at me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very strange English translation, very literal translation, but you can see the word order is different. So thanks to that pointer, Nancy. I think it would be good for us to have a little lesson or mini course or something, just talking about that issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think the info is in there. If we go through TUSMA, for example, our course for beginners, but maybe a little standalone thing just to give people some tips about that would be good too. So look out for the future.
Absolutely. And of course, these things are all general as well. There are so many exceptions in all languages to the standard ways of doing things and standard ways of saying things. And kind of what springs to mind when you start looking at that is, if you look at proverbs, you have, or at Shanukul, you have a different way of saying things, like Onte nachhul loider, iflor hove glick, where it's not following this sort of
Yeah, sometimes in copula sentences we don't even use the copula. We can just drop the word is. We don't even say it. So you can say he's a nice guy, is far jase, but people might often just say far jase, and we understand that it's there, but it's kind of been dropped.
Lovely. So going back again to what we're talking about tonight with initial mutations, séimhiú and uru, a lot of that is dependent on the gender of nouns when we're talking about how nouns are affected. And Aidan has two questions. Firstly, he says, I've honestly too many challenges and questions, but here are just two. So the first one is something that people often ask because they don't really want to carry a dictionary around in their pocket. So the first question is, do you have any tips on remembering the gender of words, nouns here?
Yeah, nouns. I mean, of course, you can see that in the dictionary, and it's, you know, online on those apps on your phone, those dictionary apps. But again, that's not what fluent speakers of Irish do. We're not always checking what gender the word is. We pretty much know what gender every word is. There's a few exceptions, but there are pretty strong guidelines. I suppose if we say there were three main groups and then exceptions, first group would be nouns that finish with a broad consonant. So maybe they have a fada n or ar or ach at the end, like eranach, an Irish person. They are all masculine. Far kapan are the examples there. Now there's exceptions, of course. Words that finish with a vowel also tend to be masculine. Ishka, dalta are the examples on the screen, water and pupil. But there's also exceptions that don't fit that rule, which are masculine. Words for jobs, words that finish with in, even the word kali, girl, famously, is a masculine noun, but it's just the noun is masculine, of course, not the person. And that means nouns that finish with a broad consonant or a vowel are masculine. So the third group, nouns that finish with a slender consonant, they tend to be feminine. Nouns like kush or bjor, they are generally feminine. Again, there's exceptions. There's some common groups. Words that finish with og or lun, bialan, lower lun, they're all place words, really. And words that end with acht as well. We have a lot of long words that finish with acht or iacht, gaeltacht, maniacht. They're all feminine. Languages tend to be feminine, except Berla. So we've got, this probably feels like a lot coming at you right now, folks, but there aren't so many rules for this, for guessing the gender. So I think you can quickly work that one out. And this topic is coming up in a new module on Bitesize very, very soon in the new year. So you'll be able to look at that and have a study and a practice and work out which words are feminine and masculine. But for fluent speakers like Ben and myself, it's pretty much obvious nearly all of the time if a noun is masculine or feminine. And we can tell two ways. We can tell by looking at it like this, but also when you see the word inside a phrase, inside a sentence, and how it changes, then you can see all those changes because they all depend on gender. So it's pretty obvious. So we just had an example there. Gaeltacht is feminine. But very famous phrase here is the name of the radio station, Radio na Gaeltachta. And that Radio na Gaeltachta, that na is only used for a singular noun if it's feminine in the genitive case. So radio of the Gaeltacht. So there are all these clues, either from how the noun looks or from how the noun behaves in the sentence. So get a little study in, a little practice of those things, and I promise it gets easier and easier and easier to know what gender is and then what you need to do with it. But it's a big
yes. Absolutely. So Niall, I think you're the man to answer the next question. This question comes from Neil. And this question is, what is the correct Old Irish spelling of the name Neil? Now, you studied Old Irish, didn't you, Neil?
I did, actually.
So, IE gives two examples here, Neil and Neil with a fada on it. Also, is the letter I pronounced as a double E or as a double E with or without the accent?
Yeah, so my specialist subject. I guess there can be a bit of confusion about this name, because in Ireland we tend to use this spelling, but mostly you hear the English pronunciation. What you hear most of the time is people say Niall, but that's English pronunciation. If that's how you say it and that's how you love it, that's great. But that's the English pronunciation, just to be clear. Irish pronunciation is very regular, and it is Neil. That also happens with the name which we mostly know as Brian, but in Irish it's Brian, and the exact same thing happened where in Ireland we've kept the old spelling, but we've actually adopted the English pronunciation. So people can be a bit confused about that, but we can compare those names to other famous names like Liam, Niamh, and even the Scottish name Ian is pretty much the same. So yeah, okay, so Old Irish spelling of the name. Yeah, well, the Old Irish period, if you're really looking for Old Irish, that's 800 AD to 1200 AD. It's over 1,000 years ago. And actually, the name, I think it was spelt with the Sína Fada back in those days. However, it's not today. There's no Sína Fada in Irish on the name Neil today. And it's not more authentic or more correct or something to do that. That's a different period of the language. Is the letter pronounced E with or without the accent? Yeah, well, the letter, really, it's not one vowel here. It's a diphthong. It's two vowels together, what linguists call a diphthong. So it's ia. Okay, so it's in all those names I just mentioned. Other famous words like bia for food, fia, a deer, and many other words. Every time, in fact, in Irish, we see those letters, which we call IA in English. It's pronounced ia. So it's a diphthong. And normally in modern Irish, yeah, you don't see any Sína Fada on that.
And was it always spelled with two L's?
I mean, I think so. I've seen the name of Niall Noirialach, I think would be the pronunciation. Niall of the Nine Hostages, who's a famous old king and sort of father of dynasties. And I think it's spelled N-I-F-A-D-A-L-L. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you think of like Neil Young, the musician, is that N-E-I-L coming from the Irish Neil?
I think that's kind of the opposite way around, where it's closer to the pronunciation, but it's an English spelling. You know, it's kind of gone the other way around there. I remember meeting a guy from Colombia called Brian, and his name was spelt with a Y. And I tried to say to him, oh, in my country, we just spell it with the letter I. And he said, oh, no, that would be Brian in Spanish. And I was thinking, oh, yeah, that's what it should be. But, yeah. So these names have become international, for sure.
Lovely. So we were talking about dictionaries earlier. We have a question here from Sean that relates to the use of dictionaries. Sean says, I enjoy trying to read the little poems on leglath.com. Dante. I have trouble understanding the word chromail in this one, and he gives a link to the poem. So this is an example of an initial mutation throwing somebody off, I think.
Yeah, I think I've seen this kind of issue before where people say, I can't find this word in the dictionary. And we always need to check the spelling, make sure the sheen of fada is in the right place, and the spelling in general, because the spelling is very different to what we know, but especially if there might be initial mutation on the word, because this word will not be in the dictionary with CH, because the H is just a change which has taken place for other reasons. It's like in English, you wouldn't, we can say the man's car, MAN''S. But if you go looking in the dictionary for MAN''S, you'll never get it, because it's a variation on the basic form of the word. So if you're looking for a word and the H is the second letter, try taking that H out. And if there are two crazy consonants together, if it's a BP or NG or something, maybe try taking that first one off and taking the uru away. And then you should come on the word you're looking for.
Very good. Very good. So, Cramail, what is it?
It's a mustache.
Anava. Thanks for that. Now, another question here from Brooke. This is not related to tonight's theme, but the word deal, meaning beloved or dear. This question is, this be used when writing a letter? And for me, yes, of course, it is used, but in a more literal way than in English. We may say dear sir or dear madam in English, and they're not really that close or dear to us. It's a formality. I think deal is more for people who you genuinely are close to, like a char yiel, a vor yiel, your hor yiel. What do you reckon?
Yeah, a little bit more like beloved or something, or
yeah, it's a genuine.
Yeah. I'm always a big fan of the phrase achara, because it works so beautifully in a very formal situation and a very informal situation. So the classic letter, dear sir, dear madam, achara is the classic opener. But you can also use achara when you're down the pub with your oldest friends, or well at jachachara, and that's totally natural there too. So achara is just, it fits every situation, I think. But maybe you want to show a little bit more affection too. So there.
Absolutely. Now there's a question. I don't see it here now, but I saw a question come in earlier. Just have a little look. It was a more general question about use of a bite size and different plans. Yeah, now I don't have a graphic for this, but I'll just read it out. John, who says, to learn Irish, I need to hear it spoken and have someone to speak to in turn, or to speak with in turn. Can you say what level of bite size I need to find someone to speak it with? And John's interest in simple conversations, so more phrases before moving on to grammar. So that kind of concerns what I do on Bitesize Bio and the community that Emma manages on what we call Pubble, which is a fairly multifaceted forum for Bitesize members. But essentially, to answer your question, the plan that you want is GROW, John. So I have that there somewhere. And GROW includes all of the materials, the learning materials that Niall develops, but we also have a monthly opportunity to practice reading a text with a group of other members, and then a weekly conversation session where we have a variety of scripted conversations that focus on particular themes that we progress through over the course of 3 months, really. So that gives you an opportunity once a week to practice these phrases with other learners. and to get pointers from me or Siobhan, depending on who's hosting the session, on pronunciation. It gives you an opportunity to ask about pronunciation, different dialects and that as well. And I know you're saying phrases before grammar, but we also take a look at the grammar that just comes up in the course of those scripts. And it's an opportunity to look at things in a relaxed forum and ask questions. So that'd be the one. So that's GROW, GROW.
And it's kind of full split, isn't it? When people talk about, you know, I don't want, you know, I'm wary of the grammar and I just want to speak. But these things are all part of the same thing. It's all part of the language. And I'd recommend to anybody to get speaking the language as soon as possible. In the, you know, in the basic level of Bitesize, you don't have access to those sessions. You know, you have access to our online courses and you can study by yourself. But really the best thing for all of us is to do our study, but also to practice and to be speaking with people. The more we use it, the more we say things, the easier they get. And something that takes a lot of effort today, if you say it every day, by next week, it just comes out of your mouth naturally. So speaking practice is really important. I know it can be hard to find, but there are definitely ways to do that.
Absolutely. And talking about pronunciations, another question here coming from Tom Nord, Gormaga Tom. And thank you, Tom. Tom says, I'm not a Bitesize member yet, but I was wondering if I could ask a general pronunciation question. My question is, I often hear the second vowel pronounced in a group of two vowels. This is what you were talking about earlier. So examples are ein team sounds like ein team instead of just a straight EY, a team. And fiechem sounds like fiechem instead of just fecum, one sound on the vowels at the beginning. Tom says, all the books I've consulted don't address the sound of the second vowel. They all state that only the first vowel is pronounced. So is what I'm hearing related to dialects, personal preference, or both? Thank you in advance. So this comes back to the diphthongs that you were talking about, Niall.
Yeah, I suppose when we have a combination of vowels together, those can be quite tricky because they're not usually what you'd expect if we're coming from English or possibly from other languages too. So, yeah, they can be tricky like that too. AO, when those two letters come together, for example, and AOI, indeed, they're not obvious. They're not intuitive at first until you remember that you've got a friend called Aoife. And then AOIFE is the spelling of her name, so Aoife. So that's a good example for that particular sound. So I'd kind of recommend anyone for pronunciation, if you had a little small size notebook and you could head each page with a couple of letters like AO. And anytime you see a word that is AO, you could just put that down under it and keep a list and keep building on that and your familiarity with that sound. That's one way to do that. There's a few things about pronunciation. You know, there is dialect and there's variations. For example, I mentioned AO, but Ben is from Kerry and I'm from Tyrone, which you might consider a Kerryman's natural enemy, especially in football terms. But
it was in the 80s anyway, yeah.
We do, right up until recent. But anyway, we have different dialects, of course. So that example AO will be different for Ben and myself. If we say the word for free, for example, SAOR, how would you pronounce that, Ben?
Sayer.
Sayer. So I would say seer. Okay, and there's a definite difference there. I've got more of an E sound going on and more of an E for Ben. So that's regional variation. And when you're using online resources like Folklore, the great thing is that you can click on 3 different pronunciations. And another great website is fumana.ie, where they really go into the details. But again, you can hear different examples, and you can also listen. Yeah, but you can listen to them. Sorry, you can also see the phonetics written out. Sometimes it's very technical, but it'll show you the difference. And another pronunciation thing. Was it Tom who asked?
Yes, Tom Nord. Yes.
So one other thing is that we have to be wary of broad and slender consonants. So sometimes, you know, the word feich, to watch, to look at, fada, I suppose ifada and then a. Well, ifada is a slender vowel and a is broad. So the f at the beginning is slender and then the ch afterwards is broad. So that's why it's not just a straight feich. It's, you know, you might hear a little bit of a feich because there's slender and then there's broad.
And again, if you're in Munster, you hear feich.
Feich even, yeah. So there's real details there, and it depends on the resources you use. Fumana.ie, the link has just been on the screen, is a really cold-eyed, clear look at that. And they don't have every word in the dictionary, but if you search for ifada a, for example, you'll find examples with that. If you search for ch, you'll find examples of lots of words with ch, and that's another tricky sound that's worth checking out. So I hope that helps, Tom.
And yes, Gurmila Magat. I think that brings us to a close for this evening. Gurmila Magat is a Velin, Niall. Thanks for being with us. And as I was saying at the beginning, if anybody's watching this back on YouTube and you have any questions relevant to this discussion or interview or whatever it was, you're welcome to submit them, and we will keep an eye on what's coming in and do our best to help you. Again, remember as well that we have a variety of different membership plans for those who want to get serious about learning Irish and doing a bit every day. And there's an address down at the bottom of the screen here. Scrolling GROW is specified, and that's the one that includes the opportunity to interact and practice conversation with other learners and get instruction on pronunciation and discuss grammar and such with me and Siobhan. But there are other plans as well, depending on how you want to go about things. But all of them contain the lessons that have been put together, or the learning materials that have been put together by Niall, who's done a very good job of making difficult things easy to understand and enjoyable to engage with as well. So, nolig vurva, Dave Galair, agus bemi to kind live and Blian Shachuin. Be back in January with another guest and another theme. So, thank you very much for your questions and comments. Agus Kadeen Hiadorera, Turera.
Nolig Dave, Slam.
Slán go fóill.